Welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joe Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
Do you remember back in the 1980s when we were kids growing up in Antonia, when it seemed like every movie had a montage in the middle of it?
Mm-hmm.
Remember this? Like, usually there was a main character that had a challenge come up in their life, and they went into this montage experience where there's, quick cuts of them building a skill or training for something. Not all movies, but a lot of 80s movies had this in it. Usually cheesy music was playing behind it, driving synthy music. And they, like Rocky, he was building skill to go box better, right? And every movie seemed to have this. And I don't see movies anymore having this montage of a character training. In fact, a lot of movies are just the character's already awesome and they just do cool things. They don't have to go and train or be like excellent through this montage experience.
I think Rocky was the first movie that did that. And I think it became a trope that a lot of other movies in the 80s pulled on. And then it probably, just like with any fad, it gets too much. And then in order to stay fresh, you pull away from those, those tropes or those techniques. But what was nice about the 80s skill development montage is it gave you a snippet into what went into whatever it was they were attempting to accomplish. And we were kids, like we're of a generation, like we're at the very tail end of Gen X. And I think that Gen Xers got a lot of messaging about what you have to do to what blood, sweat, and tears have to go into something in order to make it happen.
Yeah.
And I think that I'm not going to blame it on a lack of 80s style montages, but I do think that we started giving a message to younger people that may have been a piece of propaganda that we, for all intents and purposes, wanted to be a positive message to younger people. But I think that we missed a couple crucial components. I think we missed the 80s montage part of the rubric of what actually creates success. We started telling kids you can be anything you want if you just work hard. I mean, sometimes we even left off the last part of it. Sometimes we just said, you can be anything you want. Full stop. But that's about as useless and as horrible, actually, as your generation will save the world, which is a terrible, terrible message to have given to an entire generation of people. And I think it has actually had terrible effects. But we did that to our kids too, right? And I think particularly millennials feel the crunch of this one.
It was supposed to be inspiring, but it did put, I think, a lot of pressure on younger people. Like, oh, it's up to me, oh no, and like a lot of anxiety. Like, I'm not even an adult yet. I'm already thinking about how do I save everything.
Yeah, well, and I think it's that messaging probably created the kickback message, which is you guys gave us a terrible world that we inherited. So I actually think that whole we'll have to save a world that you messed up, I think that that's actually a reactionary message to putting the burden of saving the world onto young people's shoulders, which is it's a terrible thing to do to young people, especially if you don't give them a solid formula for how to do that. No plan, no formula, just guys go save the world. So there's some cross-generational messaging that is not okay, right? It's not been the most productive messaging. That said, this message, going back to the original point, the message of you can be anything you want if you work hard, missed a crucial component of the rubric of success, and that is you can be anything you want, which is questionable in and of itself. But if we're trying to be inspirational, we don't look at the exceptions to the rule, right? But you can be anything you want if you work hard and you develop the right skills. If you develop the right skills, and the 80s montage was supposed to be a hint of skill development. What work went into making something happen, even if they were quick cuts. And when we removed that component, when we removed the 80s montage from our movies, but also when we removed it from our propaganda, when we removed that piece of it from our communication to people, we somehow allowed a vacuum. Because, of course, it's not a complete formula. So what's going to go into that empty space of the thing that's necessary, but nobody told you is necessary? What ended up getting filled into that was character or personhood. Like if I'm the right person, right? If I can be anything I want to be, since it's all about becoming something, I can be anything I want to be if I just start out with enough talent, if I'm just the right person, plus I work hard. And I think a lot of people are realizing that the things that they assumed they'd be able to get, the positions, the career paths, just the success, early success, that all became really disappointing because there was a component in there that we didn't effectively communicate. And when it's missing, people don't accomplish what they're hoping to accomplish because that's a big node in the system. And then they just get really demoralized, very disappointed, very demoralized, and lack a lot of the energy that's required to keep going. Because at that point, if you're not focused on skill development, you just end up spinning your wheels. Hard work only goes so far. In fact, hard work, a lot of times, if it's not directed to the right thing, is a humongous waste of time. And so if you have to already have been something or somebody who has all this talent or whatever, and you combine it with a bunch of hard work, but you don't do progressive skill development, nor do you understand the value of progressive skill development, then you end up spinning your wheels like crazy. And then you're going to look to the people who gave you that messaging originally and tell them they were full of crap. Like, you told me I could be anything I wanted to, and I did what you said. I followed this formula, which was an incomplete formula, but I don't know that. I followed this formula, and it didn't work out. So you lied to me. You lied to me. And why would I trust you on anything? I can understand a sense of betrayal that young people have when they got that message, and it did not end up the way that they thought it was going to. And then combine that with the message of also, hey, you're also supposed to be saving the world, right, at the same time. All of that's got to be really, like, embittering, I would imagine.
I think at first this can be a concept that might be a little bit difficult to grasp if you like hard work and effort, and that might feel like skill development. But I think when you talk about skill development, Antonia, what you're talking about is this idea of test iterating and feedback loops. So you might work really hard, you might put a lot of effort into something, and you might have some natural talent at it, and you may not be getting the results you want or the outcome you want. It's because maybe the feedback loop is not there. And that's really where skill comes from, is the idea of getting feedback. So as an example, like doing a podcast is a lot of hard work. We have to put a lot of hard work into showing up and saying something of value, and we've had to get better at our skill over time. And I've seen a lot of people try to start a podcast, for example, like, me and my roommate or me and my friend are going to talk on mics, and they might be putting a ton of hard work into it. And they might even be building some skill around how they talk and communicate. But if it's topics and things that no one wants to hear, you're not going to see success either. There's like an outward metric there. And as you build skill, you recognize, the feedback loop of, does this add value to where people would listen? That's that feedback loop in skill development that is also so key. And I think that's something that we need to address as well as we talk about this, is that there's a component of building something of value in the world, or that will be valued enough for people to like engage with it that you're doing.
Well, I think part of skill development is helping other people see the value of what you're doing.
Yeah.
And that's part of what needs to sort of come up with the building of the skill. Well, first of all, if there's no value to it, why are you doing it? Right? You have to, there has to be some value to the skill you're developing, even if it's intrinsic reward. But I think what you're talking about isn't the value of developing a skill. It's if you want this to become a part of what you do for the world, right? It's not just intrinsic value. You're not just getting a personal hit off of it. But this is part of what you're bringing to the world. Like, you can be anything you want to be, meaning that you can find your place in society. Like, no matter what, there's going to be a place in society for you as long as you work hard. And the missing piece of the component and you build skill. And part of building skill in this, in the way that we're talking about it, is helping other people see the value of what you're bringing through that skill development. Like the world then makes a place, like it opens itself up for a place for you because it does value what you're giving it. It needs that. It understands that you're bringing something it needs, and so the world makes a space for you so that you can bring that thing that it needs. So a piece of this too is it's not like there's a ready-made space for you, and as long as you work hard, the world will plop you to that space or into that space. It's more that the world accommodates things that are good for the ecosystem. And so if you work hard and you build skill, in a way where the ecosystem sees the value of what you're bringing, it will make space for you. And it might be a different place than you anticipated. It might be something different than what you were expecting. You might not end up using your degree. You might not end up using whatever it is that you put time and effort into and thought that time and effort was going to end up at a specific place. It might be a different place, but you can be you can be happy and achieved and successful. If you understand what your own metrics of success are, you can be all of those things if you work hard and you build skill. But here's why it's so easy to avoid the skill development piece of this algorithm. Skill development is incredibly demoralizing. Like unless you've gotten to a place where skill development becomes something that you enjoy the process around, because you can start to enjoy the process of skill development. In fact, developing skills can become addictive. You can almost see the people who have gotten addicted to building skills. They're those like polymaths that are accomplished in everything. And you're like, how do you know so many things? How have you done so many things? And it's because they got addicted to a process. So you can get addicted to the process of building skill. But most people aren't, because skill building is generally a very demoralizing experience, because it takes so much test, iterate, and so much feedback from the outside world that tells you that you massively suck for a while. Like you're going to massively suck. My good friend Dave, who's an INTP, says, I told myself on a regular basis, he's like, I told myself this until I really integrated it into me, that in order to be good at something, I'm going to have to suck at that thing a lot first. And so he said that I just had to realize that things are going to feel impossibly hard and I have to do them anyway. And that's the mentality you have to come with a lot of times when you're building skill, is because there's going to be a moment when you're like, oh, I don't like this anymore. Like this doesn't feel good. And there's going to be a moment when you have the world reflect back to you how little natural talent you have, or maybe how little natural talent matters. That's actually the bigger one. I think we massively overvalue the importance of talent and massively undervalue the importance of skill development. And we'll get to a place when we're building skill where we realize our talent it won't carry us through these hard times. And then we just go, oh man, I don't even know if I want to do this anymore.
We started off this podcast talking about the 80s montage and movies and how culture helps kind of give messages to us about what's needed or what's required. And if you look around at the cultural norms now, or the big movies of now, they're superhero movies where the superheroes often have been given some kind of superpower just because they just show up with it. And they didn't have to necessarily earn that superpower. And I can think of a bunch of movies in my head right now. I won't give any specifics because I'm sure someone who loves these movies that's listening will be offended if I say it. But there are many movies that came out in recent times that do this. And it's this, we talked about this on a podcast years ago, this idea between the spider bite, Spider-Man and the Spider-Man ethos or the Spider-Man lore was bitten by a radioactive spider, and he became this creature that had all these superpowers and abilities. And we contrast that with this idea of Batman, Bruce Wayne, who, in order to get revenge and, become a superhero, went and trained and had to put the work in to build skill. And it's a very different message. Those two characters are very different messages, I believe, in a superhero world. One is the spider bite, and one is the training, putting the competency in and working really hard to develop the skill. And I think what we're saying is a lot of messaging we get in the modern world is that you were or you were not bit by a spider. You either are or are not this identity or this thing. And if you are that thing, then you have the ability to do that. And if you aren't, then you don't. And I mean, I see it everywhere. I think that's really what a lot of people are contending with. A lot of people are contending with this feeling of, well, I wasn't bit with the attractive quality, so that means I can't be an attractive person, I guess, whatever, or I can't achieve things, or I wasn't bit by the talent to get on stage and speak or to have social skills, so I guess that's just not in the cards for me. And then there's other people who say, I wasn't bit with this spider bite, but I want to be more social, or I want to create this thing that I don't, like, it may not be as natural to me, or it might be something that's a little more challenging, and they go and build the skill toward that. I think that's the core of the message here. Is there's a sense of it's going to take work and skill development, and you're going to fail a lot, and you're going to fall down a lot, and you're going to feel foolish, quite frankly. And people might even think you're crazy. If you're like, hey, I'm going to go do this thing. And I'm like, you're going to do this thing? Really? Like, come on. There's so many other people that have more natural talent. Why are you the one that's going to do that? And there's determination. There's vision for your life that comes into this. And there's a discipline of developing that skill over time that has to be in place. And I think that those things are achievable for a lot of people if they put the work in. And that's kind of what we're talking about. I think there's this kind of dual look here. From our culture. And I think that it doesn't necessarily always give us a good message. That spider mite message is not always the best message for us to hear.
Yeah. The misnomer is that you have to be something to accomplish, but in reality, you have to become something in order to accomplish.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And you only become through change, growth, skill development. The reason why it's so demoralizing, though, is you hearken back to an old podcast we did about Spider-Man versus Batman. And I was also thinking about the competency model. We did a podcast on Stephen Covey's model of competence, which is a quadrant model, and it talks about the phases people go through when they're building any skill. You start out as what's called unconscious incompetence, which means that you don't actually know what it takes to be good at that thing. You're the picture of an armchair quarterback, where you're criticizing what this accomplished athlete on the television is doing, has spent decades pouring everything that they had into, doing like performing this sport, and they miss a throw, and you're sitting there acting like that was like an easy, that was an easy throw, or that was an easy catch, and you just missed it. It's like, I don't think you have any idea what actually goes into making all of that happen. And yet you're sitting there and you're lazy boy,
Yeah.
eating wings, right? Greasing up your television controller, yelling at some dude who's like 7% body fat.
Come on.
Right? So it's like, I think we do this all the time. And that's the first quadrant, is unconscious incompetence. And anytime you get good at something, you have to move to the next quadrant, which is conscious incompetence. And conscious incompetence is where we abandon ship most of the time.
Talk about an ego hit.
Yeah, exactly. That's when you go, oh, maybe the spider bite mentality isn't enough. Maybe talent isn't enough. Oh, I suck at this thing. I suck hard at it, and I'm going to be sucking at this for a while. And it's that part that's just it's hard when you've been given messaging that you shouldn't have to go through that level of discomfort. But that quadrant is incredibly uncomfortable. And in order to develop any skill, you have to be willing to sit in a lot of discomfort, we live in a world where homeostasis is about as comfortable as it can be. So we don't like discomfort anymore. We don't like boredom. We don't like impatience. We don't like to have to work harder. I hear my 14-year-old stepson say stuff like, this is a waste of my time. And I'm like, a waste of your time? What exactly are you pouring your time into that's so valuable? What do you mean it's wasting your time? Like, who are you? What are you going to be doing with your time other than playing video games? He's like, yeah, that's what I mean. I'm going to play video games. I'm like, dude, your time isn't worth anything.
How do we define wasting time, right?
Yeah, exactly. So like we just get this idea in the modern world that like going and doing distracting, playful things is somehow, that's the baseline. And we shouldn't have to do anything uncomfortable that takes us away from doing like comfortable things. And yet skill development requires a ton of discomfort. But if you're willing to sit there and be in a lot of discomfort, right? It's not, accomplishment isn't who you are, it's what you have to become to accomplish. And that's the part of the quadrant, of this quadrant model, where you're becoming something different. A part of your ego must die. The part that likes to think that it's good at everything without even having to try it, that's the part, like, there's a part of that piece of you that must be buried, right?
I think that's the real challenge at that level is, the skill and the hard work is one thing, but man, the emotional and mental discipline you have to keep going in the face of feeling foolish and the ego hits you're taking. That is a challenge. And that's something that I think that's when people give up, is it just becomes too much. It's like, is this really worth it? And I think I think a lot of times it wasn't the thing you really wanted to do anyway. Like if it's something you really, really, truly are drawn to and want to, it's the passion of your life, or it's the skill you just really want. It kind of separates out the real desire and the vision for what you're going after to people that are kind of playing at things in a way. So that ego gets challenged there, and I think that's really, really tough. And then but you get through that piece, and you move into the conscious competence, and this starts to feel good. It starts to feel real good. Now in a way, it's a little bit of an ego hit, or like a boost, not like a down hit, but like a boost of your ego. You feel like, oh man, I've put the time and effort in. I am Batman who went and trained, and now I can protect Gotham City. Like I've got competency to do that. I've built skill around that. And there's a sense of just confidence in walking through the world that I've got what it takes. All the hard work I put into this, I got it. I've got it behind me. I've got it under me. I've got it around me. I have this in me to handle this thing. And I think that feels really good at that level. And then moving into the final quadrant of unconscious competence, where you've gotten all the hits of your ego feeling good and all this, and you have to think about the skills you're applying to the world. Now it's become a deep identity level change in your life. You've changed who you have become to just be this person that has this skill now. And you don't even think about it anymore. It's just on autopilot. You just do it because it's just who you have become over time.
Yeah, people who have been in unconscious competence for too long can't communicate to other people how to do what they do, because they've lost track of what goes into it. They lost track of the formula. Like they don't have to do the work anymore. They only get the result of the answer. So they forget how to teach other people how to do the work. And yet that's the most ascended level of skill development. When you get to unconscious competence, like you said, it's muscle memory. It's now who you are. So again, accomplishment isn't something you are, it's something you become. Like you have to become something different. But then when you become that person, then it is something you are. So you're not going to be an accomplished person out of the hatch. Like nobody comes out of the womb an accomplished person, just knowing a bunch of stuff. You always have to go through these levels, but it's that desire to skip steps, or it's not having been communicated to an accurate idea of what that step actually requires. Like we see the result of the person who is that skill, but we didn't see all the work of them becoming that skill. And that's the piece that's so hard, is we try and we are not already that person, and then we give up.
I used to think this about actors and actresses. Like I used to think that people in performance were just born with a talent of being able to act. And I think they did have some talent. But if you've ever seen somebody working on a movie or television show as a professional actor, it is hard, grinding work to have to kind of sit around all day while lights and cameras are set up and just wait. And then all of a sudden, okay, we're ready for you. And you got to jump in front of a camera and switch into a character and do that scene or those lines repeatedly until they get the shot they need. And it's grueling. And then you take a break and you sit around and wait a long time again. And you're like, well, they just had natural talent. They can just do that. But I bet a lot of people in the creative world like that had to build this skill. Well, I know they have had to build this skill. But as a kid, I always thought, well, they're a different type of person than me. They're a different kind of person. I almost had that spider bite feeling. They were just bitten with the acting ability, the performance ability, and they just are that thing. But and you don't see the work that goes into it, because you see the finished product. You see the television show or the movie, that actor in their best performance. You don't see all the times they're waiting around, all the struggles they had to do, all the failed roles they took, sometimes you see the failed roles if you can look back over their career, but you see you don't see all the work that went into it. You just see the final result, and you're like, oh, I could do that. I mean, you just stand up in front of a camera and you be a character. That's easy, right? It's not. It's a lot of hard work. You put a lot of effort into it. It's grueling, and it's discipline and focus. These people are getting up at even crazy people, like what's his name that was on 2.5 Men.
Charlie Sheen.
Like even he, like as crazy as he was, and I was watching some videos of him a couple weeks ago. Like even during that crazy time when he was going through all that drama around that show and stuff in Hollywood, he was still getting up at 4:30 in the morning to work out and get to the studio by 8. Like the work ethic that crazy guy had to put into his performances was insane. The amount of effort he was putting into maintaining his body and his discipline to put that performance together. And I don't think we realized that. And that was hard won. He had to put the skill in to learn that. And I think that's the kind of thing that we're talking about, is that we don't see that behind the curtain work that goes into it.
Yeah. Well, and work, like you said, with skill development. He's not just getting up in the morning early and working hard. He's getting up to go work out his body, which is skill development through, mastering the strength of your body. So
to offset all the cocaine, probably.
Yeah. Most likely. Well, and I was about to say, how do you get through that demoralizing time period? How do you get through the time period where you're going through skill development and you're hitting that, oh, I suck, and I'm not just naturally talented at this, and I'm going to actually have to put some real effort into it. What is it that we need to get ourselves through that demoralizing time period? And obviously putting any more further burden on ourselves is not good. But there are things that we can do that will help us keep motivated in demoralizing time periods.
Motivation is important. It's tough to get that motivation to keep going. It came up actually in our most recent, we were doing this INTP mentorship with a small group of INTPs right now. And we're working with them, and it's not just an INTP problem, but INTPs do struggle with motivation sometimes. If it doesn't make sense to them, it's hard for them to move forward in something. And so we were doing a lot of work on our last mentorship call around this concept of motivation. And then we were talking afterward, and we kind of built a small little model of how this applies to all types of what it takes to motivate yourself, no matter what your personality is.
Yeah. So one of the crucial components of motivation, in my opinion, is good tools. No matter what personality type you are, you need to have good, solid tools. And I think of it in terms of, I remember using a really crappy vacuum cleaner. It was a vacuum cleaner whose motor had burned out. And so I had to push the vacuum cleaner in order to get it to do suction. And it was almost impossible. I also think of this in terms of cars that have lost their power steering. And you can steer the car, but it just takes a ridiculous amount of effort, a surprising amount of effort if you've never experienced that. And a really bad set of tools will make you just want to abandon the project completely. I would work with a car that didn't have power steering long enough to get to a mechanic shop and have them repair it for me. But if I felt like I had to do a bunch of stuff with, driving that car, go to a bunch of places, run a bunch of errands, or have that be a part of my career, I would totally abandon ship. I'd be like, there's no way I could possibly do this job. And that's the idea of a lot of effort going into something that's kind of a waste of time. So that whole work hard and get to where you want to be, if you have a really good tool or set of tools that helps you get there much easier and faster, and you don't have to pour as much energy into it, a huge piece of motivation is already covered, because you won't be demoralized by the bad tool itself. Now, tools are different depending upon the job you're doing. You have different tools cleaning the house and vacuuming a rug than you do in maybe transforming who you are, doing personal growth work. In personal growth work, all the tools are going to be inner game oriented. So you want to have really good tools there. In that INTP mentorship group, we were talking about self-sabotage and going through all the different things that we use to sabotage ourselves. It's almost always a perspective, a framework, a narrative, self-talk, it's all that kind of stuff, or stupid stuff we do. Those are bad tools. Right? Those are the things that we automatically think or do, and they're terrible tools. They're so demoralizing. That's part of what self-sabotage is. And if you're going to remove that tool, you can no longer rest in on that way of thinking or that way of doing something. If you remove that tool, you've got to replace it with a much better set of tools. So regardless of your personality type, a major component in motivation is having a good, solid, set of tools that you're working with. But the other thing you need to honor your judging function, the decision-making function of your personality type. It needs something specific to go along with tools to keep motivated. So I think what we can do right now is kind of run through a quick list of those judging functions and what the thing is that you need to combine with solid tools in order to keep your motivation going while you're doing the demoralizing task of building a skill.
So we've organized this by judging function. Again, if you don't know what a cognitive function is, maybe you're a new listener, we've recorded a lot of podcasts and we've got a lot of material about cognitive functions and how each personality type uses these cognitive functions on our website. So if you go over to personalityhacker.com, you can find out more information there and listen to old episodes. But let me just run down through these in a kind of a list. We'll start with INTPs and people that use, other TPs, people that use introverted thinking. We've nicknamed it accuracy for their decisions. And we've identified that for an introverted thinking user, someone that makes decisions with introverted thinking, they need tools plus clarity to generate motivation to take action and to keep themselves going. If they lack clarity and they have tools, they probably aren't going to be motivated. If they have clarity but not the right tools, they're also probably not going to be motivated. So clarity plus tools for a TP, someone that uses introverted thinking, creates motivation in their life.
And you can see that that's what those of us who are TPs are always looking for. It's this moment when when all of the information that you've been taking in, all the research you've done, all the thinking you've been doing, all of that information, all these data points suddenly sort of coalesce around an organizing principle and you get it. It's just this moment where you get it and everything around that seems clear, particularly when that happens in something personal around your life. Man, instantaneously you want to go do something. Like it's so motivating. So in those moments of clarity, if you are a TP like me, those moments of clarity are crucial for motivation, for knowing what to do. And so if you get a moment of clarity, it's easy to diminish the importance of how far that thing is supposed to take you, meaning that it's easy to have clarity, get into action to some extent, and then go like, oh, well, I lost my clarity, and then just sort of peter out. You've got to treat that clarity like it's one of the most precious things you've ever experienced in your life. Like you've got to do everything you can to keep that clarity, whether that's journaling and then rereading what you journaled, right? Like I said, my friend, who's an INTP, he writes down little things for himself, and you do this too, actually, Joel. Writes down little things and then sets it on a mirror or puts it in front of him so he can keep reading it over and over and over so he maintains the clarity that he originally had. So clarity is super important, and you've got to treat it as something precious. And in order to capitalize on clarity, you have to have the good tools already there. So tool building and discovering really good tools is something that's really important during a time period where you're lacking clarity. Because then when you find your clarity and combine it with those tools, that's a moment of opportunity. That's when you are motivated and you can keep your motivation through those tough times.
When we talk about FJs in the Myers-Briggs system, so these are people that make decisions using extroverted feeling. We've nicknamed it harmony. And when an FJ is needing motivation, it's tools, having the right tools, plus support helps them find the motivation to keep going. If they have support without tools or tools without support, it can be difficult to move forward. It might be tropey, but it's kind of the get together and kind of dish on what's going on in your lives. That can be some level of support. Hey, what's going on? Who needs support here? That level of I got your back can be really helpful for an FJ to move forward in their life with that motivation.
It also creates a sense of accountability. It's hard for extroverted feeling, that function. It's hard for it to do anything for itself. Like it's hard to be motivated when you're just doing it for yourself. So when you have a support structure around you, it feels like you're not just doing it for yourself, you're also doing it for other people. This is why some people can't work out unless they go to a class. This is like why spin classes exist, because you're showing up to a group dynamic that is relying on you to be part of that group. Like the spin class won't happen unless there's a class, right?
And they're supporting you.
Yeah.
It's mutual support.
Exactly. You're responsible to them to support them, and then you're getting the benefit of the support back. So support is critical for people using extroverted feeling, plus those good tools. Like don't diminish the importance of those good tools. And just like introverted thinking, TPs will wait for a long time for clarity because sometimes it's not always clear. It's not always just available to them at any given moment. For extroverted feeling, sometimes you have the wrong group of people around you to support you. And that's something that you have to be, you have to keep your finger on the pulse of. If you want to accomplish skill development, then you're going to have to find a group of people who will be supporting you in that skill development, not just supporting you as a person. because the wrong people will actually discourage you from doing the right thing because they're supporting you as a person. They're not supporting you doing this, building the skill. So if they see that's hard on you, or you're going through a tough time, or you're demoralized or whatever, they'll tell you to stop because they don't want to see you. They don't want to see you uncomfortable. That hurts them to see you in a bad place. But if they're there to support you building that skill, then they'll give you the messaging you need, which is keep going even though it's hard. Keep doing it even though you feel pain, right? That's the point of the spin class, is that you keep going even though you're all sweating and exhausted. And so getting the right support structure might take some curation. It might take some time to find the right people. Once you've got that plus skill, you can stay motivated.
So now remember, though, extroverted feeling and introverted thinking are opposite sides to the same coin. If you're an FJ that uses harmony or extroverted feeling, you're also going to have introverted thinking in your cognitive function stack or your CAR model. If you're a TP using introverted thinking, you're also going to have extroverted feeling or harmony in your cognitive function stack or CAR model. And so the little bit more advanced from what we just talked about, how these look in motivation in specificity, there's also some of this for you on either side of this coin. So what do I mean by that? Basically, if you're a TP, support will also be something that will help you with motivation. It's not the mission critical thing. Clarity is the mission critical thing plus tools. But support is in the mix because you have some of that extroverted feeling or harmony process in your personality. And same thing for you if you're an FJ and you're using harmony or extroverted feeling, you will still need some clarity to move forward and have motivation. Now, it's not the primary thing. Support's going to be your primary thing, but you will need a little bit of that clarity woven in. If you're unclear and you have the support and you have the tools, you still may not be able to move forward. You might need both of those things to help you get the motivation you need in your life. So there's a little bit of an advanced nuance here to personalities, and I think that's something to remember, that these are polarities that don't just live in isolation. They're connected to each other. So let's move over to the extroverted thinking people of the world. These are the TJs of the world. Extroverted thinking, we've nicknamed it effectiveness. It's about getting results. And this is also tool-based, but it requires a plan plus tools to find motivation. So if you have the tools and you don't have a plan in front of you, you don't know how to apply those tools to that plan, and you lack motivation. Once you have a plan and you've got the tools to execute on that plan, now you can start motivating yourself and moving forward in your life.
Extroverted thinking is linear. It goes from A to B to C. And a plan helps you know what the next step is. And if you don't feel like you know what the next step is in accomplishing what you need to accomplish, it's very difficult to even... If you don't know what D is, it's hard to even start with A. Does that make sense? It's like you don't want to go from A to B if you don't already know what D is. And so if you're just sort of throwing spaghetti against the wall or, swinging at the air, you will not stay motivated during that time period. And again, of course, we're talking about staying motivated through the tough time period of conscious incompetence conscious incompetence. When you're going through that quadrant, it's easy to be motivated to start. You might be able to start in skill development because you got excited about something. Everybody can get excited. It's staying motivated through the tough, demoralizing, uncomfortable time period. And when a TJ has a plan, even if they hate the plan, even if they're hating going through the plan, if they've got a plan that they can rest in on, it will sort of pull them through that time period of feeling demoralized. In fact, sometimes they won't even register how uncomfortable they feel because they have such allegiance to sticking with the plan, and they sort of compartmentalize that. But if a TJ doesn't have a plan to rest in on, they feel every ounce of that discomfort, and then they'll abandon ship.
For FPs, these are people that use introverted feeling to make their decisions. We've nicknamed it authenticity. Tools are needed combined with inspiration. So inspiring the heart, the deep core of who you are. This is different than excitement. Excitement can apply to all types. This is different than just getting excited and passionate like in a moment flash of emotion. This is a deep inspiration, a resonant inspiration towards something combined with tools allows you to get motivated and stay motivated. And so this is really important. And if you have tools without inspiration or inspiration without tools, you're probably going to lack motivation as an FP.
Inspiration is so crucial for FPs because FPs are the most reluctant to change who they are for an outer world result. Like, that's really hard for FPs to do. And quite frankly, FPs are the most likely to think that they're bitten by spiders or not. So going through skill development and the discomfort of becoming somebody else, having parts of your ego die and need to die in order to become somebody who accomplishes something is really tough to an FP. So the reason why inspiration is so important, something just came to me really quick, and I'm probably wrong about this, so I'm going to say something and be totally wrong, and my apologies. But I want to say I recently heard that the word inspire means breathed by the gods, right? And this idea of, let's pretend it does, even if I'm totally wrong about that.
For the sake of this podcast, we're just going to pretend that's the definition.
Whatever word means breathed by the gods, pretend I use that word. The point is that an FP needs to feel like they're doing something almost divine. They need to feel like something is being breathed into them. There's something about being connected to something bigger, that this is almost like their fate. Their fate was not to be who they are, but to become this other thing.
Their destiny.
Their destiny. Ooh, fate's a terrible word. Destiny's a fantastic word.
That's the word I think that resonates with FPs.
So if you think that destiny is on your side, if you are breathed by the gods to go do this thing, then all of the changes that have to happen don't feel like you're abandoning pieces of yourself. It doesn't feel like you're betraying the self. It feels like you're honoring the person you were supposed to become. And without that inspiration, without that feeling that you're heading towards something like that, then the discomfort becomes overwhelming. Because instead of feeling like you're doing something that is aligned with your destiny, you're just feeling every second. Because you can't push aside your feelings as an FP. Using introverted feeling means that you feel every minute of that discomfort. But if it's for a greater good or for something bigger, then the discomfort is actually, it's a reinforcement you're on the right path. So narrative is very important for people using introverted feeling. Am I feeling terrible and awful because this sucks and I suck and I don't want to do this anymore? Or am I feeling all this discomfort and all this pain because this is the process and I'm on the right path of the greater good? And inspiration will help the FP feel the latter. It will help the FP feel like I'm going through a baptism by fire because I must.
So just like when we talked about TPs and FJs, TJs and FPs also share all the same cognitive functions in decision making. So every TJ who uses effectiveness or extroverted thinking also has a part of them that uses introverted feeling or authenticity. And same thing for FPs that use authenticity, introverted feeling to make decisions. They have a part of themselves that uses extroverted thinking or effectiveness to also make decisions. It's a less developed part of themselves. And so plan and inspiration is going to be important for both. Now, primarily for an extroverted thinking person, a TJ, a plan is more important than inspiration, but you can't discount inspiration for them at all because they still need that as well for motivation. And for an FP, they might be inspired and have the tools, but one of those tools is going to have a plan, right? Like the plan is part of the tool set they're going to have motivation and move forward. So it's important to know this is a polarity, and some of these elements are going to be needed for either of these two types of people that use these functions to make decisions.
Of course, a lot more goes into motivation. A lot more goes into doing the tough thing that needs to be done. We're just giving you a little bit of a model or a little bit of a snapshot into something that might be really, really helpful. It might help facilitate you to get to the other side of something that's difficult. But just to loop back around to where we started this conversation, the messaging that we have maybe unconsciously given to younger generations, and maybe even messaging that we've integrated ourselves. This idea that if we work hard, we can be or do anything. I think it's crucial that we don't diminish the importance of skill development and everything that skill development does for us. Skill development requires us to not assume that we're always right, that we've thought it all through, that we are in an automatically morally superior position. skill development is incredibly humbling. It's very humbling work. It requires a lot of modesty. Like, in order to get good at something, you have to have an accurate assessment of where you're at. You have to know how bad you suck. Now, true modesty doesn't mean that you'll say you suck when you don't. Like, as you skill develop, it's important to also, recognize when you've gotten further and to feel good about that. But when we remove skill development from the equation, we rob people we don't just rob them of the opportunity to become better versions of themselves, but we also rob them of the self-esteem that comes along with developing skill over time. And we have a lot of epidemics right now, not just limited to mimetic ones. We actually have an actual epidemic happening, and maybe we'll be living in a world of more. But when it comes to like the mimetic epidemics we deal with loneliness, we deal with a lot of agitation in the world. But one of the epidemics I think that we're experiencing is one of like crippling lack of self-esteem. And when we lack self-esteem, we overcompensate. We overcompensate by we put on a pretense of confidence that we don't actually feel. When we lack self-esteem, we actually double down on the things we're wrong about because it's so overwhelming to feel like, to feel like we're not ready for this world, or it's too much for us, or maybe we won't survive. And so we put up our fisticuffs all the time. We have arguments online. We think things like I know best, or like the world should be modeled after how I see it. We actually end up overconfident, immodestly, and lacking humility overconfident because we don't have authentic self-esteem and self-confidence to rest into. We don't think that we're ready for the world. We don't have the confidence to know that we can take on everything. And so we think that the world must change to suit us. We want the world to alter itself to meet us at our lack of confidence. And that's the opposite of how it works. What actually works is we build confidence, we build self-esteem by doing hard things, we get a true sense of modesty, and then when we enter the world, we model to other people how to be best versions of ourselves. And when we model that, we inspire and encourage other people to become the best versions of themselves, and that's actually how the world changes. So we can't insist that the world meet us where we are incompetent. We can't insist that the world change itself because we didn't do the skill development we should have done to be ready for the world as it is. I think this messaging of work hard and you can be anything, missing the component of skill development, I think that it's actually been crippling. So whatever you need to do, whatever tools you need to build, whatever inspiration or plan or clarity or support structure, whatever it is that you need, we highly recommend you build a world where all of that is woven into it, and that you start doing hard things. You start really developing skills that will reflect back to you all the things you're lacking, everything you as an individual are lacking. And instead of rejecting that message, instead of hating your ego hating a reflection back to you of just how incompetent you actually are, be grateful of that messaging. Be grateful that you're getting that reflection back, because it shines a light on the things you need to build, on the skill you need to build, the person you need to become to have the impact in the world you want, to be accomplished. And then when you go through all of that baptism by fire, when you get through the quadrant of conscious incompetence to conscious competence, now you've got the self-esteem, the self-confidence. You're the actual empowered person, not the fake version, not the posturing version.
Not the hashtag version.
Not the hashtag version, right? There's a lot of different ways that people are imposters for empowerment. Skill development, baptisms by fire, going through really shitty time periods, seeing how bad you suck, doing something about it, having real self-esteem, having self-confidence, knowing you're ready for the world, having enough self-confidence to enter the world as it is and knowing that you're going to be okay and you'll figure it out, and then encouraging the world to be better through that capacity, that's actual empowerment. You don't need a hashtag in that moment. You just are it. And so skill development, I think, is not something that's this is not just a this is not a small thing. This is something that I think could be a real leverage point in actually accomplishing a lot of stuff that people say they want to accomplish. And I think it's important to really sit with it. I'm going to sit with this. I mean, of course, we just recorded a podcast, and I'm saying all this stuff as if like I know this, but I think I'm actually going to incorporate this into my meditation. Where am I lacking skill? Where am I being immodest about my skill development? Where am I mad that the world didn't give me something? Where am I feeling entitlement, right? And where do I have to build more skill so I destroy my sense of entitlement and become the thing I need to become in order to get the things I want?
I'd love for you to take the questions that Antonia just asked herself that she's going to weave into her meditation. It'd be great if you took those and reflected on them in your life, and then come over to personalityhacker.com and below this episode, share some of the answers that are coming up for you. Share some of the things that you're pondering about and that you're experiencing inside of yourself as you ask yourself some of those questions. It could be a really interesting conversation to get started, and it's really neat for other people to see how you're thinking as well, because your thoughts and your stories and the way that this is striking you can be helpful to other people. They might be able to see that and be like, wow, I'm a very similar person. I never thought of it that way. That's really beneficial to me. So come over to personalityhacker.com. Below this episode, leave your thoughts, your questions, share your stories, and maybe share some of the answers that come up for you about those questions that Antonia just asked herself.
If you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. I haven't been saying go leave us a rating and review for a while, and we're starting to dry up on ratings and reviews. So I'm going to go do it one more. I'm going to say it one more time. Go to iTunes or other Android platforms that you use. I don't know how the other Android platforms work with reviews, but I know how iTunes works. So leave a rating and review, por favor. Thank you. I read all of them, so please do that. And that would actually be extremely helpful to us, especially since we just recently went into a new category on iTunes. Apparently we were miscategorized before, and the category ceased to exist, and so we were just not categorized. But now we're in self-improvement, right? That's the category we're in. And now we're like a featured podcast because we just went to a new category. So leave us a rating and review. That is super helpful for new people finding us in this new category.
Yeah. My name is Joe Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker Podcast.